Hi, welcome to the Ellis Talker Show. I'm DV LeBron. If you got contracting needs, roofing needs, make sure you check out K&H Contracting. They are a sponsor of the show. Make sure you check them out. Today, my very special guests are the president of Midlothian ISD Board, Mr. Gary Vineyard, and the superintendent of MISD, Mr. Belding. How you doing?
Hey, we're doing great, DV. Thanks for having us on this evening.
Thank you so much for giving me your time. I really appreciate it. So as many in the community know, right now there's a Vader, voter approved tax something election.
Tax rate election.
Tax rate election. And there's been some comments, and I gathered comments from the public and questions, and I wanted to have these gentlemen on the show to say the facts, talk about it, and then I'm going to ask some questions. Guys, thank you so much for coming on today. So I want to start in the beginning. Okay. And the beginning being this last budget session. Okay. And I had you on, Dr. Belding, and you talked about some of the financial struggles that or difficulties that the school was facing. But unlike every other, because Waxahachie had a deficit, there was Fort Worth had to close a school. There were several things going on. So it was like a lot of other schools in North Texas. But we talked about it, and you talked about the challenges that were coming with the budget. So how did we get $6 million in debt? Let's talk about that.
There were really three different things.
Deficit. I'm sorry, not in debt.
Yeah, it's a deficit because we're talking about the maintenance and operations side of the budget, not interest and sinking. So there were really three different things going on. One of them is, the demographer projected a particular enrollment for the district when creating that 20, and we're talking about the 23-24 school year here, right? The district then used that enrollment number to budget off of, okay? And our enrollment came in less than that projection. And because the state pays us off of a basic allotment for students on the state revenue side, enrollment multiplied by your attendance rate, you get average daily attendance, and that's what they're paying that basic allotment off of. So when our enrollment was coming in less, then that means revenues are going to come in a little more shallow, is how I would put it. The second prong of that was there's a Medicaid program, and the acronyms, okay, and it's something that schools can bill Medicaid for providing services to students, to children who qualify for Medicaid that are medical type services, in things or services that they need. And so that particular program got cut more than 50% on the revenue because the federal government disagreed with something that the state did on a time and effort study. And from way back, I don't remember the year, but it was 2012-ish, somewhere in there is that time and effort study. So they applied the cuts immediately, like this year, when they decided they disagree with it. And so we went from a projected revenue of like $2 million to $800,000. Okay, so there's $1.2 million there. And then the controller values that the whole system of our appraisal district does property values is submitted. And then the controller actually sets a number that they notify TEA about. TEA pays us their revenue. And if our values go up, state revenue goes down. Okay. So the values went stronger than anticipated. And so that state revenue dropped. So those three things together created the deficit.
And there was a lot of inflation.
Inflation certainly is an impact, those costs, inflationary costs. Absolutely. 20% inflation is a big deal.
Yes, it is. It hit everybody in the pocketbooks.
Yep.
Gary, how did the board proceed? And I asked you as the president of the board, I know every board member is a voting member, all that. I know all the good stuff, but you're the leader right now. And so I'm going to ask you, how did the board take that in? What was the board's thoughts on that? Because I did watch the budget, but other people may not have.
Really, it's anytime you're dealing with a deficit budget, then you've got to decide how you're going to handle it. And we worked with the district leadership on some of the ideas that we could come up with to help bring that down. One of them was we challenged the leadership to find ways that we could cut from the existing budget that we had. I believe we selected and decided on somewhere around 15%. Crazy enough, they actually came up with a little bit more than that. I believe we found, if I remember correctly, close to about $2 million there, somewhere in that range of savings. So that was one area that we were able to do. And Dr. Belding can elaborate just on small things that he found where we were able to save just maybe $10,000 on one area. Now, that's not a dent in $6 million or anything of that nature, but every dime helps. And so that was one of the areas that we looked at. The other thing was just what else are we going to look at? And so we had workshops about this, and we looked at the different options that were on the table about what we were going to try to do to bring it down. And we had already decided that we were not going to do a RIF, which is a reduction in force, which basically means we weren't going to lay anybody off. We were going to let attrition work on its own, meaning those who were going to retire or they were going to leave the district on their own for whatever other job opportunities, what that might be. And we would not actually fill those positions unless it was actually needed. And we would look at that kind of case by case basis to determine, was that going to be one we would have to fill or not? And that ended up actually, it's doing more with less, but that's just the position we were put in at this point. And so the board came together and made some difficult decisions to make that happen. I'm really glad that, number one, we didn't have to do a reduction in force. That's been happening across the state. Like you mentioned, Fort Worth even closing schools down, and Richardson did something similar. As did many other districts. But the other thing that we were adamant about was that our teachers get a raise. All of our staff get a raise. They didn't get one last year. Hated not being able to do that. We were adamant that was going to happen this time. Sorry, my phone's ringing. And so it rings a lot, sorry. But we were adamant about making sure they get raises. So that was the other part of the equations. We had to make sure that this fit in the budget, however that was going to work. And so we came up with the numbers and worked with, again, district leadership on what we were looking for and what we expected. We were able to come up with some numbers that worked and the board agreed on. And we were to put something together and then come up with the final numbers for our budget.
I wanted to ask you something on that, Gary. They found 1.2 during the budget talks, it was 1.2, and I see that it's gone up in savings. Okay. Last year, you guys weren't able to give pay raises. You had mentioned it to teachers because you didn't have 1.2 million. Right. So some of the constituents, they voiced that opinion on, that was one of the messages I got. Hey, why couldn't we do that kind of restraint in last year's budget? And that's more of a political decision. So I'm going to ask you about that.
I agree. But I think it's hindsight's 2020 when you do anything at that particular time. I wish, like you said, going back and watching that now, I wish that maybe we had gone back and done that to really do that. Was it discussion amongst the board at that point in time? And so I guess I could say we didn't really feel like our backs were against the wall like we do right now, where we had a huge deficit. So looking back, maybe we could have done that. It just wasn't something that the board had come up with at that time.
And thank you for answering that. That's one of those questions that float out there because people do want to give a teacher's thing. Now, I wanted to ask you, Dr. Belding, because this is a numbers question, you said that there was paper towels. Is there anything in particular that made up the bulk of that 1.2 million or extra that you saved?
Sure. There were several positions that were vacant, a number of positions that were vacant during that time that we just said, we're not going to fill them. And the thing about our staffing pattern is, as I've gone around and shared factual information regarding the election, I've let everybody know we have 1,381 employees in our school district. And for our size, the efficiency audit even would indicate that we're not overstaffed. So we're a very lean organization. And so there were positions that were vacated that were still open in that time of the year that we just said, hey, we're not going to fill those jobs. There was a lot of travel for staff to professional development or like principals. There were several principals that opted not to go to their principal conference in June. And they just said, we have it in the budget to go, we're not going to go. There were things that I had in the budget to travel to that I chose not to travel to save that money and to put it back. And so there were several items along those lines. Again, choices that were made to sacrifice in order to ensure that we could try to reduce this deficit as much as possible. We looked at everything. I know, like in transportation, Darren Casper found a way to save money on fuel costs and going to the open market on purchasing fuel, which saves some money. We looked everywhere that we possibly could to find out. I don't have all the exact items right off the top of my head. It's been a few months. Tell everybody watching that we worked really hard, whether it was things, hey, we can, like the paper towels, and we'll have brown paper towels forever. There's no reason to go to white paper towels at this point. And there are some things that we can do for a couple of years, like the professional development. Our staff needs to go to those things, and they need to continue to learn and be growing within themselves, so our kids benefit from that. But during that time frame, and even this year, there's a lot of travel that we have reduced on that, and to help get us through this time period that we're in right now.
So, Dr. Belding, because the one thing that I've learned in covering this for the last few years is that the money, when it comes to school funding, your money changes by, like, the situation changes as you go on. and there might have been a situation change on your deficit. Tell me, is the deficit the same that it was now? Did you gain any extra money? Did anything change with that deficit?
Yeah, absolutely. Something changed. And it's such a blessing that it did. I'm just going to say that right up front. Wow, what a blessing. But a couple of things happened. One, again, as we finished our fiscal year, which ends at the end of June, we continued with, let's find everywhere we can to continue to save, right? So we found more savings as we finished our fiscal year, which helped, okay, which helped that deficit bring down even more. And then our Ellis County Appraisal District helped us appeal the property values that the controller submitted to TEA, okay, because they went up more than, like I said earlier, than we anticipated. And I've said, if your local property values and therefore your local tax collections go up, the state revenue goes down. The flip is also true. If your property values go down, the state revenue is going to go up. When we won that appeal, which again, thank you to the Ellis County Appraisal District for helping us with that, and our finance staff for putting all that together, we won an appeal. It brought values down that TEA pays us off of, and that means that state revenue went up.
Okay.
And so that we realized some additional revenue, which helped shore up again that deficit. And I'm just talking about 23-24. And we got to remember, this is about last school year. It's not about the year that we're in right now. Okay. That's a really important distinction. And so it helped us. And I was waiting on the final audit report to know exactly where that deficit ended up. And we just got it really over last weekend. It was presented to the board on Monday, and that deficit ended up at $823,000, which again was a huge win. It was a win with that property value appeal, and it was a win with continuing to look for ways to experience savings going into the end of our fiscal year.
Now, I want to ask one last question, and this one is for Gary. With that information, Gary, do we still need a VATRE? Is a VATRE absolutely necessary? And then I want to move into what a VATRE is and everything about it. I want you to tell the facts about the VATRE.
Yes, because that was basically affecting last year's budget. So what we're talking about right now, the audit and everything else you're referring to, affected last year's budget. Okay. And so this is this year's budget. And so this year's budget is where we are now. And that's why all the hard work is going into to try to do the best thing we can for students, teachers, staff, and make sure everything is taken care of, the staff needs that we have, the class programs that we have. Everything is a part of the safety and security. So there's a lot to consider when we're building a budget and what's got to be covered. Okay. And so all those areas are part of that. When we were doing the budget process, we had to decide. The other thing is to get class teacher ratios on that. And we're mandated at the elementary level that where we have to be. At the secondary level, we have a little bit more leverage where we can do that. And we have stayed with the mantra really 24-1, 25-1 for the most we can. So we looked at the different numbers as far as if we went up and higher, that would actually lower our budget a little bit. But we didn't expand that to 28, 29, 30-1 just to save money, because that's going to affect the teacher student experience and education and their student learning. So we don't want to impact that heavily. So we came together to decide that we felt comfortable with a 26-1 ratio. And that is where we were able to help to build that budget and do that. Okay.
Yeah. So that's awesome.
And that is whenever we started. Okay. Now, when we knew that was when the discussion for the VATRE came up as far as what are we going to do to make up for this money? Okay.
Yeah, I remember that.
That's where we were like, the only thing we can really do at this point is go back and request a VATRE and get those 3 golden pennies. And those are pennies that are provided by the state. And we get additional revenue from the state by requesting that. Okay. And I'll let Dr. Belding go into that because he's mastered this the whole time. But that was really where it came from. This isn't just a penny swap. We get a lot more money for those pennies doing it that way than just a penny swap.
Yeah, no, I definitely, and that's one thing that may confuse. I know it confused my wife. She was like, what the heck is golden pennies? So talk to me, what is a VATRE? What is golden pennies? Are you guys going to get actual gold pennies coming in? What's going on here?
Okay, let me first off to say, Texas school finance is highly complex and it's ever evolving. You talked about things change, right? And you and I have talked about that before. I will tell you, you can go to the TEA website or you can Google search Summary of Finance, TEA. It'll take you to a page to look at the Summary of Finance for every school district in the state. Okay, you can go in there and type us in and you can see what our Summary of Finance is. For 23-24, that school year, which we closed out our fiscal year in June, the Summary of Finance still has us as near final. It's not final yet. Okay. And you can see where the adjustments are and the date that those adjustments were made. You can go back to 22, 23, and then some of your finance will say final, but there was an adjustment made. If I remember, I'm working off memory right now, but last April or March of 24, there was a number change on that. And if you go back to 21, 22, it still says final, but there are still adjustments being made. So it is a highly complex system, and it moves a lot, even for previous years. When I was a superintendent in another school district, I remember I got a letter from TEA saying they were going to reduce our state revenue for the current year by $60,000 was the number. And it was from something that they settled up from 6 years before. And I was like, that was 6 years ago and things, but it's highly complex. There's a lot to it. So let's get into what a voter approval tax rate election is. And I've been doing a lot of presentations, trying to explain this to people and trying to make it as understandable as I can make it and being highly transparent with it. And so basically what it is when we get our certified property values from our appraisal district, we submit those to TEA. TEA then does a calculation for the maintenance and operations side of our tax rate. And they tell us what the maximum compressed rate, the MCR, is at that point. Okay. They give it to us. And then the interest and sinking rate, which is the side of our tax rate that we do collections to make our mortgage payment, our debt payment, okay, is set by the board. And so it's combined together to make one tax rate that everybody sees on their property tax bill. And last year, that was $1.1092. Okay. So that MCR came back this year at 0.6669 is what TEA told us that it needed to be. If we want to go higher than that, we have to request approval from the voters. The board looked at that, and then based on advice from our financial advisor and the fact that our board has worked really hard in our district to pay down debt early, refinance debt to lower interest rates. We just refinanced some variable bonds to a fixed rate. And so that way we had some room on the INS side to drop the INS from 44 cents where it was in 23-24 to 41 cents for 24-25 by 3 pennies, and asking the voters to consider going up on the M&O rate by 3 pennies, and they're golden pennies. I'll tell you why in just a second. Okay. That way the overall tax rate compared to 23-24, 24-25 is really a net zero. It's a slight decrease. It's 0.0023 of a decrease, but it's pretty much a flat zero. Okay. And those 3 pennies on the maintenance operations side are golden because in school finance, there's this thing we call recapture or the Robin Hood. And when a school becomes property wealthy, then the state says, hey, you have to send us X amount of dollars of local property taxes for them to redistribute to other districts or other areas of their budget. And there's a reason for that. And I could go into that, but that would take up more than just this show. We probably ought to do it. Just the equalization of Texas school funding sometime, just a conversation about it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's really fascinating, highly complex. Mm-hmm. But the thing is, those 3 golden pennies, if approved by the voters, that the revenue that we would collect locally would never be subject to recapture. The state in the law says you get to keep that revenue local. And the reason why we're getting additional state aid for those 3 pennies is basically the state rewards a district for a higher local tax effort on the M&O side using those 3 golden pennies. So they give you a little bit of extra money, the yield on them, okay, for that. And the projected additional revenue that we can use on the maintenance and operations side of our budget would be $4.7 million. We are right now projected to run a deficit of $5.6 million. Of that, the board gave a raise to our teachers of 3% for our teachers, 1% for all other employees with a $1,000 floor. Nobody got less than a $1,000 raise. That was very much on everyone's heart that nobody would get less than that. Okay. And that cost, I want to say it costs us about $3.5 million to do those salary increases for our staff. And part of this mechanism is, I know some people have said, if it's already in the budget, and how is this going to help? Well, it's going to help because our board made a conscious decision to give the pay raises to approve those last June and not wait on the outcome of this election. There are some districts out there that wait for the outcome of the election and they tie raises to it being passed. And our board chose not to do that. They chose to go ahead and approve the raises before the vote happened. Okay. So that's a piece of this puzzle.
If you do a Vader now, what happens in the future if you need another Vader? Is there an effect with that? Do you still get the 3 golden pennies? What's this about 3 copper pennies? What happens?
Okay, in the system, in the finance system, there's also, in addition to the 3 golden pennies that are still available to the district if voters approve it, the board could have asked for an additional 9 copper pennies, okay? An additional 9 pennies. It's available in the system. They're considered copper because they don't yield quite as much in the system, and that revenue would be subject to recapture of the Robin Hood plan if we ever became property wealthy, okay? And our board did not want to ask or seek that because we want to keep local dollars local, okay? Right. And so that's why the board didn't opt to ask for those additional 9 pennies.
Okay. Now, Gary, I had this questions for you because this is something that I told you I got a bunch of messages in. Gary, why do you want to raise people's taxes? Does this raise people's taxes?
Really? Okay.
Does this raise taxes?
Actually, it does not. And so this is one of the discussions that we had. So because it is a Vader, it affects the M&O side. Okay. And so on the M&O side, that is a tax increase on that side. But there's always the other half of this story. And the other half of this story is that we knew that was going to be the case. And so in August, the board chose to drop our INS rate by 3 cents. Okay. Knowing that this was going to be coming up. We've had this discussion for months leading up to this, that this is what we're going to have to do when we adopted that budget. We knew this was going to be something we were going to have. We did not want that to be an impact, a tax impact to our taxpayers, where they would actually pay more taxes just if we are able to make this happen. We are fortunate that with our bond debt, that we're in a position that we can actually drop our INS rate by the 3 cents that we gave and still be able to pay down on our bond debt that we have, because that is one board of our board policy. Okay. And it helps us remove that. We've also refinanced that bond debt to actually save even more money to do that. Okay. So when you take the 3 cents that we drop from the INS and combine that with the 3 cents that you're being charged on the M&O side, it's a net zero tax rate increase to the taxpayer. When you get your tax bill in the mail, it doesn't break them down into 2 different numbers for you. It gives you one rate. Okay. And that rate last year was 1.1092. Okay. With the Vader passing, the rate this year will be 1.1069. So as Dr. Belding alluded to, it is a lower rate in effect total than what the revenue tax was last year. Okay. If we did nothing at all, had we not, Joe, so just keep this in mind too, had we not dropped the bond rate by the 3 cents and not asked for the Vader that we did, we would still be at the same number. Okay. And so that's the other part that you have to consider. So to answer your question, no, this is not a tax rate increase because it's a net zero in combination and overall. That's why this is not a tax rate increase.
So this is the question for either one of you. I don't know who wants to answer this one because it's a numbers thing too. So will this raise the taxes, not taxes in tax rate, but will this raise what people pay in their mortgage and their tax bill when they get their tax bill? Will this have any effect?
Yeah, sure. What's interesting about our property values this year, whenever we got them back from the appraisal district and they were sent to the Ellis County Tax Office, they prepared our tax notice. And the average value of a residence in our district actually dropped this year by about $28,000. Okay. So that value dropped. It doesn't mean everybody's dropped, but the average value dropped. Okay. On a residence. Okay. So in that scenario, dropping down $28,000, the tax bill at the rate if the Vader is approved drops. Okay. And so that part of this equation is going to be what your values have done. If your value has dropped at that rate, then your dollar amount that you're writing a check for is going to go down. If your values went up, then you're going to write at the same rate. It's going to go up a little bit. Our district gives a 10% homestead exemption. That's a local option homestead. It is not, that's in addition to the state homestead. Okay. So that's a benefit that hardly any school district in the state does. Okay. And that costs the district approximately $5 million in revenue a year on the M&O side. But our board wants to help taxpayers and homeowners the very best they can. Now, overall, our values that were certified last July went up. Okay. But on the average value on a residence went down by that much.
Okay, so the overall value went up. Now,
Hey, DV, I'm going to jump in here just one more thing. I want to hammer something to you real quick. I want to ask you a question, if you don't mind. So let's take the Vader out of the equation. Let's act like we're not even having that conversation. Let's pretend for a moment that we go back to May and we have an even budget. Okay. So the state mandates what our rate's going to be. We don't. We adopt whatever they tell us to do on that. Okay. So that would have been roughly 0.6669. That's the difference. Our bond rate at that time was 44 cents. So if you combine the two, it's still 1.1069 for this year, doing nothing. Okay. Last year's rate was 1.1092. So with that being said, if we did nothing and everything was even, did your tax rate go up from this year compared to last year? Is there a tax rate increase?
Not if it's those numbers, definitely. Not if it's that.
Exactly. But this is the exact same thing. Okay. So that is why I'm telling you this is not a tax rate increase, because had none of this happened and all the numbers stay level, it's the exact same number. Okay.
So I had a question about that. Because this was a question that was submitted to INS is your bond capacity. And as MISD did put a bond up before, and I saw the actual board conversations. You guys could look it up after the board, kind of after bond action report, what happened and stuff like that. But you lower the bond capacity with INS when you did that. Where does that put you if we need to use a bond we need to put out a bond for building another school or something? Either one of y'all can, whichever one.
Sure. We worked closely with our financial advisor when we were working through all of these numbers, and the bond capacity that he came back with is in the $300 to $400 million range at 41 cents. And again, because of paying debt early and the refinancing, we locked in the interest rate on some variable rate bonds. And we have a payment in February on that. We already have the money in the bank to do it. And so therefore that 41 cents will support a bond capacity of 300 to 400 million. I think it's really in the mid threes to four, but it's $300 to $400 million.
Okay. Now I want to ask this question in two different ways. So please don't jump ahead of me here, because there's a method to my madness here. Okay. So if the Vader, and I'm going to ask that, if the Vader, let's say the Vader failed and the voters didn't approve it, and you cut that to the 41 on the INS and the M&O has to go back, do the people save money on that point? If the Vader failed, do the people get a tax cut there? And I'm going to ask it another way, so don't jump me.
Okay. All right. So that's part one, right? Okay. Just want to make sure I didn't jump in on you.
That's part one.
The rate will drop 3 pennies.
Mm-hmm.
So it comes down to that's $1.769 at that point.
Okay. So, yeah. Now, if the Vader doesn't pass, how does it affect the school district?
We would run a deficit budget this year right now, projected at $5.6 million, which would have to look for other expenditure cuts. Because here's the thing, with our fund balance, which is basically our savings account, one of the indicators on the Financial Integrity Rating System of Texas, it's indicator 7, has a scoring mechanism, and it's that the district at all times has a minimum of 90 days cash on hand, 90 days operating cash on hand. It's indicator 7. Okay. And if you have less than that, it's not like a fail. It's you get 10 points, 8 points, 6 points, 4 points, 2.0 points. I think that's the scaling. So the lower you're getting, the fewer points you have. All right. And so that's the way we're graded. And then honestly, the agency starts watching us and things of this nature. So to run a deficit budget with recurring costs, which salaries are recurring costs, is something that is not best practice, and it's not something that you can sustain long term. Okay. Mm-hmm. So that's why having this $5.6 million deficit budget and working on if the Vader doesn't pass, then we will pull that money out of fund balance. Okay. And again, all the mechanisms within school finance, there's a lot of time between now and then. It could go up and it could come down. It's based on enrollment, based on ADA. There's a lot of factors in that, right? But that's our projection at this time, and that's the best numbers that we have at this time. And so we run that deficit. We will have to work on trying to get balanced for 25, 26.
Yeah, and that, imagine, would be tough choices. Now, this is where I get into the political one. But one of the things that he brought up was fund balance, and people asked, I got that question about why did the board decide not to use fund balance they could easily cover this, and did fund balance go up
The fund balance did not go up. We ran a deficit budget of $823,000. So we're pulling that much out of the general fund balance. In schools, we have multiple fund balances. Okay. One is the general fund, which is our maintenance operation fund balance. One's the interest in seeking fund. Okay. And then there's the school lunch program fund. Now that school lunch program fund, you can only, the money that's generated there within the school lunches and breakfast can only be used in that area. You cannot use it to shore up your general fund at all. Okay. And that fund balance in there is used to buy equipment for kitchens, 2 different things for the food service program. Okay. So we can't use any of that money. We have a construction account as well that from the 2016 bonds, which we are doing different repairs with and things like this. But there's not very much money in there anymore, but we still have some there. That would be considered a fund balance right now. But you can only use that under construction. You can't use it over your general fund. So that's the thing that, again, school finance is so complex that there's a lot of rules and regulations about how we can go about doing our business financially. So on the general fund, which is where our operations lie, paying salaries, paying utilities, paying for safety and security, teaching positions, all other positions, all of that, right? That's the general fund and the fund balance. And that's where we ran the deficit of $823,000. So that money's coming out of fund balance. It reduced it there. And if we run a $5.6 million deficit for 24-25, that money is coming from the general fund balance. Okay, we can't pull it from anywhere else. That's where it's coming from. And so again, that would bring that down. And we have to find a way to get balance. And like you said, it's going to be some tough choices on that. So that's where we developed those 4 priorities for the $4.7 million, which would be safety and security, okay, maintaining low class sizes, because in our conversations about the budget, we went from 25-1 for grades 5 through 12 to 26-1. And we have classes in middle school and high school that have over 30 in them because nothing's distributed perfectly. Everybody worked really hard to balance classes the very best we could, but it just, you can't do it 100%. And we have some classes for that teacher that have below 26, right? So it's an average, right? Mm-hmm. If we had gone to 28-1 for those class sizes, we could have saved an additional $1.7 million. But we have to acknowledge that now class sizes in core areas are going to be in the mid 30s or a little higher. Then you have some other periods that are in the lower 20s again, because you can't balance perfectly. So that's when we talk about maintaining low class sizes. That's what we're talking about. Teacher and staff compensation is a piece of it. The board went ahead and approved that pay raise, and now the Vader would help pay for that and then set us up for future pay raises. And then finally, student programming and experiences, ensuring that we can maintain the programs that we are offering right now and not have to reduce any programs and maintain that student experience. Because one of the conversations we had, I've shared this in all my presentations, that we discussed when we were looking for savings was, do we need to have the band, our cheerleaders and drill team kids go to the away football games? Okay. There's a savings there. It's not hundreds of thousands of dollars, but it's tens of thousands of dollars that we could have saved. But I said, that's part of the student experience. Those kids work hard, they prepare, and they deserve the opportunity to perform. That's part of the student experience that we're wanting to continue to offer and to protect. So when you talk about what happens, there's a lot of moving mechanisms. Honestly, I'm not going to say this is what we're going to do exactly, because we will reconvene, get together, and start working on it, on what the best path forward is with, again, the student experience and the education of our students is number one priority, keeping things as far away from the classroom as possible. And as a 1 and 2 priority, and taking care of our staff the very best we can, because we want to serve our kids the very best that we can.
Somebody asked about security, because security is included on that. And I know that the states decided that every school is going to have a police officer. They did send some funding for that. So do we need more funding for that? What was the disparity there?
Yes, the state did give us an allotment of about $300,000 a year on that, which, hey, I appreciate it. But the budget that we have for this year is a little over $2 million. And that's still with the city of Midlothian phasing us in on costs. Okay. And so one of the things that we talked about, inflation has hit us. And we went back to 2019, and our costs for safety and security, I'm recalling numbers off the top of my head a little bit, they have gone up about, it seemed like it's over 200%. Since 2019. And the reason for that is back in 2019, I wasn't here then, but I think we had 5 SROs in the whole district. Now we have 14 to 16. And it's all the costs around that, which safety and security is everything. We're going to figure it out on that. And that's going to happen because keeping our kids and our staff safe is paramount. It's job one. And the state did give us that $300,000, but there's still a $1.7 million delta, and that's going to grow next year as that phase in, as we take over more costs of that program. And I really thank the city of Midlothian for helping us with that. I can't express my appreciation enough, because that's one neat thing about this community is we all rally together to take care of our kids and our teachers and staff and make sure that they're safe.
Yeah, definitely. Gary, there on your private capacity, there's been a lot of arguments online. And I understand those were in their private capacity. I get it. But wording is something that gets thrown around, different words. And one of the words was surplus. Tell me, do we have a surplus that the board is just not getting on?
No, I'm not. No, we're stressed thin. If we had a surplus, then we wouldn't be requesting a Vader or anything of that particular nature. So no, there was a time we've always had a healthy fund balance. Like you said from before, that's something that we have to be able to do that. I want to add to the fact that for the last 21 years, MISD has carried a superior rating on our first ratings. Okay. And that's very important that we protect that, because that's what affects us ability. If and when we have to go out for another bond, that can be affected by that if you don't have a good superior rating on that and you have a lower rating. So it's very important, but it's also a reflection of how well our leadership has managed our funds over the last 21 years. And we continue to do that. Want to make sure that we stay on top of that.
On that fund balance question, I've already cited in the first that indicator 7, which has a target of 90 days operating cash on hand. And there's a reason for that. School districts don't get revenue every month. TEA pays us 3 times a year. And then our local revenues, our taxes start coming in earnest in December. We get a little bit in November, but in earnest December, January, and then it starts tapering off in February. So there are months that we just don't have a lot of cash flow, but we still have to operate. We still have to pay salaries. And even though our teachers in their contracts are 187 days of work is what their contract is, which is basically 10 months, but we pay them over 12. Okay. So even in the summer, June, July, August, when we have full payroll going out during those months and things. So we have to have that fund balance to pull from at times in order to make payroll and things of this nature. And so that's why it's another important piece of the puzzle. And that's why that target is at 3 months or 90 days operating cash on hand.
Okay, guys, I could keep you on here forever talking about this. Unfortunately, I got to cut it low because most people, but I want what I wanted so much. And this has been the whole thing since this whole Vader was announced. I was desperate to find the right wording to be neutral and partial to this. And because I didn't want to, I want people to look at it and make their own decision. So I want to thank both of you for coming on and spending your time here talking about things and then answering those questions, because some of those questions were, and Gary, I was pulling that one off of the internet. You don't want to just raise everybody's taxes. So I wanted to get you guys on to talk. So I want to give you guys the last word, like I always do on the show, and let you talk about Vader.
Okay. First of all, thank you for having us, being able to be on your platform, to be able to do that. You provide a great service to us and the city, and even Ellis County for that matter. So I greatly appreciate what you do with that. But I want everybody to know this. For those that don't know, I've lived in Midlothian since 1978. I went to school here. I graduated here. My kids have gone to school here. I put all my kids through MISD. I bleed MISD, and I have from day one. And so that's where my heart is. And when it came time for me to start giving back, that's why I ran for the board in 2018. And I have served this district from my heart from day one. And I will continue to do that until the last day that I serve. So I'm here for a passion. This is not about politics for me. I don't care about politics at all for me. This is all about doing what's best for kids. This is doing what's best for MISD and helping them become the best district that they can in Texas. I fully believe that. I believe that from day one. And again, I will do that until I quit serving this district. But I'm here for my heart, and that's it.
And I know that to be true. Dr. Belding, your turn.
I've been here in Midlothian for just almost 13 months, just barely over a year. And I have really fallen in love with our kids, with our staff, this community, and the support that the community has for the district, and just the investment and the buy-in is just phenomenal. And just like you said, the facts are we're asking voters to unlock those 3 golden pennies on M&O side of the tax rate to gain that $1.8 million of additional state funding and move the 2.9 million of tax collections from INS over to M&O, so we can have 4.7 more on the M&O side of our budget to operate with, to fund those raises that are in this budget this year and the other things. And then it's basically a net zero impact to the tax rate compared to 23-24 for the 4 priorities we talked about. And I appreciate everybody's consideration. And I would just really encourage everyone to please vote. However you vote, just participate in the process and vote your conscience. And I really appreciate everyone's attention to this and just, how y'all welcome me to the community. And I'm excited about the future.
I'm glad. I've got one last thing I wanted to say, and then you can go. I want to take a minute just to recognize and thank Dr. Belding for the amount of work that he and his staff have put into this. And just, he has been all over Midlothian. He's done close to 60 presentations to this point, very close. And so he's exhausted himself trying to get out there and let everybody know this is what is best for the district, and be able to help do what we need to do to help our students, our staff, continue to have the programs that we do, the low class sizes, our safety and security, everything that's funding priority for us is very important. He's championed that from day one. He is loved by this district. He has just come in here and just killed it ever since he started his first steps on the campus. And I couldn't be more honored to have him as our superintendent. And I'm very proud of the job he's done at this point. So Dr. Belding, thank you very much.
I want to see a motion in the board for a vacation for the superintendent after this. I want to see a motion. All right. Okay. Well, thank you guys for coming on. Yes, as Dr. Belding said, get out there and vote. This is the most consequential election of our time. And not only that, it closer to home, it affects your children and their schooling. So make an informed decision. I hope this helps in that. And you guys take care. Hi, I'm DV LeBron, and welcome to the Ellis Talker Show. As you know, there is a Vader going on right now in Midlothian. And I wanted to make sure that I presented both sides. So today I have another MISD board member here who wanted to speak on the Vader and make sure that he informs the community as well. Ed Harrison, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to have you here with me. I appreciate that very much.
Yeah. It's not often I do in studio ones, but I wanted to get it done. Sir, I wanted to talk to you about this Vader. There's a lot going on with it. There's been, questions, debates. You've been vocal about it. And so I wanted to kind of get your thoughts on, what this Vader and how it'll affect people. So I saw the presentations, as you've probably seen them. And, they're talking about this voter approved tax rate election. And
that's good that you could do that.
Yeah, I know. Right. And they say on this election that it won't change your tax rate because, there was a lower of an IS. There's a bunch of stuff that goes into it. Before we kind of go into it, do you want to kind of go into how we got here? Because I guess we're $6 million in debt, I think.
Yeah, sure. And thank you once again for the opportunity. I am the only trustee who voted against the Vader, and that doesn't mean that I'm wrong because I'm in the minority. And one of the reasons why I ran for MISD trustee is because I wanted transparency. There were 4 principles that I run out. I wanted taxes to be lower. I wanted test scores to be higher. I wanted transparency on anything, and I want teacher pay to go up. So in all the decisions that I make on the board, those are the things that I'm after is how do we get more for less? And how do we go from a B district to an A district? And if you go back and you look at the board meetings, there's been very, very little conversation on that, DV, is how do we get not just from being good, because we are a good district, how do we get to be the best? And that's my goal, is to be the best. And I want to shoot for that in every facet of the MISD. When the Vader came up, we had this deficit, which at the beginning of the crisis here, it was about $6.4 million. We just had the audit come in just Monday night, as a matter of fact, and that deficit is down for last year to about $830,000. So we went from 6.4 to 830. Now, I want to take you back for just a minute, DV, back to the 23-24 budget adoption. I was brand new on the board, and so I was the most inexperienced board member. I knew that we had about $127 million in revenues coming through the MISD. And I knew that there were places to cut. Now, what people don't realize is they think that a trustee sees every line item. We don't. We see the big box. And we're shown, matter of fact, we were shown, I think, more this year than we were last year. So what the trustee has to do is keep pushing and pushing and pushing, asking questions. When I came onto the board, I had been attending MISD meetings for about 2.5 or 3 years. And I had heard some things that concerned me. There was never a real effort to cut things. And when I mean cut, I'm talking about associations, lunches. I'm talking about programs that should be cut. I'm not talking about anything that has to do with teachers or classrooms. We want the best in both of those areas. Like I said, I want to be an A district. When it came to voting on that 23-24 budget, there were only 2 trustees who voted against that budget. There were 2 reasons I voted against that budget. Number one, MISD had promised teachers a 2% pay increase. The night of the vote, I believe it was, the night of the vote, I kept questioning that. How can we not find the money to give the teachers a 2% pay increase? And they said, it's not there. We cannot do it, period, point blank. The other was, in all the boards that I've been in and all the businesses that I've been associated with, I've never seen a budget that's $127 million where we couldn't cut some fluff and fat out of it without hurting the essential elements of what we do. And that's the kids, that's the education. I was told, no, there's nothing to cut. Well, fast forward about 6 months, and now we have a deficit of $6.4 million. And that's significant. And there's things we have to do. And I think some good efforts have been made in that. So I want to give kudos to a lot of people. When that deficit came out very, very shortly, we found out that the district was able to cut about $1.5 million, give or take, in real dollar cuts out of that budget. Now, I said at the meeting where that was revealed, I was elated that we were able to that rapidly under the leadership of Dr. David Belding to make those kind of significant cuts in a significant deficit. And what I said is, that's great, but wouldn't it have been better if we had had that kind of fiscal restraint last year when we were putting together that budget? And when I said that, I had a fellow trustee ridicule me, said, you shouldn't have said that. Well, yeah, I should have, because we learned by mistakes and we should have been cutting budgets everywhere. So long as it doesn't cut the kids or the teachers, we got to get to that A district. So because of that, I began to look at things more seriously. What could we cut? What about, things, associations that we're familiar with? And I've been very vocal on TASB, the Texas Association of School Boards. It is a taxpayer-funded lobby association. They do services for school districts, but they also pay lobbyists in Austin. And for instance, 2 of the things that they lobbied on were they went against some legislation that was going to prohibit boys from being in girls' restrooms and locker rooms. Well, I support that legislation. Now, let me make sure I clarify what a taxpayer-funded association is. When I, as 40 years of the home builder, I paid dues to my home building association. Those were private monies that I paid, and it was voluntary. When we as taxpayers of Midlothian ISD give our taxes to the Midlothian ISD, they pay money to the Texas Association of School Boards. And from that money, they hire lobbyists, and they lobby for some of the most leftist things that you can imagine. That is one that I just described for you. So I have been asking, why don't we revisit this and see if we can align ourselves with some other association or get out of that association, which could save untold thousands of dollars. That's never been looked at very seriously. So I believe that we can cut money and continue to cut money.
Yeah. When the Vader did come up, and I remember watching the budget, because I watched the budget, I tried to cover it, and I watched the budget things, and I saw that you voted no on the Vader. And I saw the budget negotiations where they were going back and forth about the money that was here and the money that wasn't here, and why not fund balance. There was a lot of things talked about. So let's fast forward to the Vader. How did that come about? And how did you see that?
Well, the Vader, when it was brought forth, was an idea of how to help eliminate, how to lower that deficit. And at first, I got to tell you, DV, and for those of you who are watching, I wanted with every fiber in my body to support the Vader. But the more I studied it, and I actually went to Dr. Belding's office, and he was very gracious, gave me an hour of time, and I built a spreadsheet. And here's what we were anticipating. And I want you to listen very closely to what I'm about to say. This is crucial. At the time that they were building the Vader philosophy, they were anticipating a 10 to, I think, 15% increase in property values. So easily put, if you had $100,000 house, it could go up to 110, 150. There's no $100,000 houses in Midlothian. And I said, if we stay at the same tax rate, that's going to be a tremendous increase in tax bills. And everybody that I showed those numbers to said, yeah, it is. But the fact that we were anticipating that kind of tax evaluation increase did not deter the talk of the Vader. So what we should have been doing is considering how do we lower the overall tax rate, make a real reduction as property values goes up. And what we were shocked with, I remember Dr. Belding talking to me about this, he was shocked that the property values actually declined a little. So the property values go down, the tax rate should still go down because your taxable base of property went up $1.5 billion. That's huge. So what that means is new businesses that were built here, new buildings, new houses that were built, new developments. As soon as the developer takes the property out of ag and he plants it with finished lots, the taxes begin to accrue on that property and the MISD gets their share of those taxes. So $1.5 billion increase. As I looked at this, and I looked at the numbers, the night it came to vote, DV, you are correct. I was the lone vote against that. And I was right. And here's the reason. And
there's a lot of talk online, and obviously that's where the show goes and some of the things, and there's things said about you not wanting to fund schools, not liking teachers, not liking public education, being a supporter of the education saving account, or vouchers, as some people call it. So you went against this Vader that's going to, provide these funds. What do you have against? What's going on?
I will address that. And thank you for bringing it up, but I want to say something. You were in the Navy.
I was.
And I was in the Navy.
Yes, sir.
And when I joined the Navy, there was a war going on. Yes. And it was Vietnam. I'm not like you. You had combat experience. I had no combat experience. I never did anything dangerous. I was safe in every job I had. And I'm thankful for that. Mm-hmm. When I got out of the Navy, though, I joined because I love my country. And that was back in the 70s at the end of the Vietnam War. You know what? I still criticize my country. I love my country. I served my country. And I could still criticize my country. And I still do it today. I may or may not agree with the policy in Washington or in Austin or wherever it may be. I criticize that. That doesn't mean I don't love Texas. It doesn't mean that I don't love the United States of America. I do. And I've spent my life politically trying to make it even better. Because I criticize or I disagree with a policy does not mean I don't love the MISD.
So you're not anti-MISD or anti-teacher.
It's ludicrous. I've spent my time. I spent almost all my own money to get elected. I don't get paid. And I read every document, every book that comes across here. And some of the board books are 1,000 pages. And as I said, I got elected because I want transparency, higher teacher pay, lower taxes, and better test scores. So I'm all about teachers. As a matter of fact, it was last year when I voted against that 2023, 2024 budget. Myself and one other trustee were the only ones who voted against that because it did not give teachers that 2% promised pay increase. So anybody who says, I don't like teachers or I don't like the district, that's ludicrous.
I do remember that budget. And yes, one of the things that you said during that vote was that if you weren't going to give teachers, you couldn't vote for something that wasn't going to give a teacher pay raise. And you can look at the MISD site and look back at the board meetings and look at those discussions, not this last budget, but the budget before. So the Vader, why do you not like it if it's flat, if it doesn't increase people's taxes?
Let me talk about one other thing on the teachers, because I want to pound something. There was a bill in the last legislative session that would have increased funding to the public schools. As a matter of fact, there were two. I'm going to talk about real brief. One of them said that all new additional funds going into an ISD, 50% of all those funds have to go to the teachers. That was lobbied against by the Texas Association of School Boards. Wait a minute. If we're concerned about the teachers, why are we funding a left-wing, taxpayer-funded lobbying association that kills the pay that would have gone to teachers? Second, there was a bill, I think in the fourth legislative session, called HB1. HB1 would have brought $9 million into the MISD. That would be here today in this district. And next year, it would have allotted $15 million. Well, once again, Texas Association of School Boards lobbied against that. I'm not saying they were the ones that killed it, but they were the ones that worked to kill it. So those two things would have helped teachers, would have helped our district. Both of those things, TASB shut down. Now, as far as the Vader, the more I studied it, I had come to the conclusion by the night of the vote, that the Vader is not truthful, because what they're talking about, and I am not saying anything bad about my trustees. And by the way, everything I'm saying tonight, I'm told to give this disclaimer. This is me personally. I'm not speaking as a trustee, but the other trustees, I'm not sure that they get what I'm talking about. If the tax rate stays the same, then your tax bill, it might be the same, but the tax rate's not staying the same. As a matter of fact, the very reason that there is a Vader election is because on the M&O side, MISD has exceeded the cap for taxes. In other words, the state has said you can't increase the tax any more than this, but they are increasing above that. So that's a real tax increase. So here's the bottom line. If you take MISD's own numbers that were given to us back on August the 19th in the school board meeting, they said the average home in the MISD average, there's going to be some way above and a few way below, but is 476,902. Now, if you pass the Vader on that home, you will have a $143.07 increase in the property tax. Now, one trustee said this. He admitted that it was a property tax, but he said, you can give up coffee or you can give up a meal to pay for that. I don't look at it like that. Instead of us asking taxpayers to give up to pay a higher tax, I think we should go through and make sure that we have cut everything we can cut, including affiliation with any association that's taking our money and it's not doing us a service. Now, if the Vader does not pass, your tax on that average home, that's about $477,000, will be about $5,100. If it goes up, if the Vader passes, it'll be about $5,300, about $140, $150 difference. So the Vader will increase the tax. And everywhere I put this out, I have the ad hominem arguments, something about me. I hate teachers. I hate schools. I'm undermining the district. No, what I want to tell you is the most absolute thing that you can do for the better to be MISD proud is to vote no. And here's the reason you vote no. If we had not had that deficit of $6.4 million back in February, this district would have never dug down into its books. It would have never dug down and said, where can we cut? I'm on the curriculum and instruction subcommittee. I am so proud of Shelley Blaylock over the CNI. Mm-hmm. She's done a superb job, as many in our district have. In real dollars, she cut 26%. Now, I just commended her. I commended her in public during a school board meeting, how she worked so hard. All her staff worked that hard. It's not decrease and increase. It's really decrease. Now, the curriculum instruction budget is not that big, but nonetheless, I said to her, Shelley, if we hadn't had this problem, then you wouldn't have had to cut like that. She said, yes. And she said to me, we found programs we weren't even using. Well, wait a minute. Before we increase someone's taxes $143 on that $477,000 house, shouldn't we do everything that we can to cut our budget?
So you don't think they've cut enough?
No, I don't. And on top of that, let me tell you, for the years that I've been watching and now been on the school board, I've heard this mantra that you can't cut, you cannot cut the INS side because it'll decrease bond rating. It'll decrease bond capacity. Mm-hmm. Well, wait a minute. We just cut it. In one vote, we cut it. What's true? We can't do it or we did. Apparently what we were told is not true. We were told you can't do it. You shouldn't do it. It'll reduce our capacity. And they're going to be asking for another bond. And we do need some elementary schools.
And we're about 300 million in our bond capacity. I think that's what Dr. Belding had said now. With the INS dropping, I think we're 300. Are we 300 million?
I thought it was more than that still. I thought it was about 400. Right now, our total school debt for bond is over $400 million. And our total interest that we pay, this one ought to shock you, is about $25 million a year that we're paying in interest. And it may be a little bit less because the debt has gone down right now.
So one of the things that it's going to fund is smaller classes. One of the things you've heard online is you don't want to shrink classrooms.
Number one reason I'm against the Vader is because it will, if the Vader fails, the total tax rate will go down and people will pay less at the end of the year than they will with the Vader. I want to get that through. The tax rate does not equate to the tax bill. In one of the workshops, I don't remember the date, I kept asking that question and I could not get a direct answer. And finally I said, does the tax rate does it always equate to a lower tax bill? If you lower the tax rate, does the tax bill always go down? And finally I said, yes or no. And I had to ask the question 2 or 3 times. And finally it was given, no, there's not correlation directly to that. So right here, if you say the rate doesn't go up, it's static. Well, if you compare to the Vader's defeat, the tax rate goes down if the Vader is defeated and the overall tax bill goes down, regardless of the evaluation of your home. So you're going to save money without a Vader. Also, it caused the district to go back and say, where can we make some cuts? Now, as far as classroom, one other thing on the Vader.
I wanted to talk about fund balance in a minute.
Oh, okay. I'll see that. I'll leave it right there. The classroom, we've already set the classroom size. Now I know that in some of the upper grades, some of the classrooms were bigger, and the board has talked about that with Dr. Belding. He's trying to make adjustments. None of the board members, not one. And by the way, I believe every board member I serve with are good and honorable people. And I think they want the best for the district. Nobody wants a lot of kids in a classroom. Nobody wants that.
Yeah. Now, fund balance was something that I discussed with Dr. Belding and the president of the board, Gary Vineyard. And fund balance was in the 20 or 28 something million. And now it has raised up to, in our conversation, it was like 32 or 33 million. One of the conversations that are happening online is, why don't we just take out a fund balance? Now, Dr. Belding had said that, it's the fund balance is not for reoccurring costs. Why you disagree? And tell me, why are we not using that?
Actually, there was an audit that was required by the state before you can do the Vader. Now, the MISD has spent about $70,000 that I can account for in promoting the Vader. Now, think about that for just a second. The MISD has spent $70,000 of taxpayer funds to try to get the taxpayer to pay more. That's, to me, there's something wrong with that. I'm not saying they've done anything wrong. I'm not saying they violated any policy or principle or law. I'm not saying that. But where is the other side? There is no other side. There's no funding for the other side. I was told today, all the facts have been given. No, they all haven't been given. One side has been given. Only one side. I think I'm the only person who's taken a very visible approach or very visible level of refuting the Vader. And by the way, when I do this, it's not that I'm against Gary or any of my other members. I like all of them. That's not the issue. The issue is what's best. Now, as far as the fund balance, when we started talking about the Vader, if I remember right, I've got the documents here. If I remember right, the fund balance was around 25 million, 27 million, something like that. Well, the fund balance today, you knew I was going to hold this up, is, can I see that? Yeah. Is about 32,789,000. This is as of Monday night, we were given that in an audit. Now, I mentioned audit. I mentioned the audit that was required before we could do the Vader. That audit that was required by the state of Texas, MISD paid $15,000 for that audit. And here is what, this was the straw that broke the camel's back. This was the final thing that made me not vote for the Vader. It was all the other things I've talked about, but this was it. In the Vader, it said the fund balance can be used for emergencies. Wait a minute. And if you go back and pull up the vote, I cited that in my, before we voted on the Vader. I said, it says right here, we paid $15,000 for this audit that's required by the state, and it says we can use it. So what I'm hearing is this: we've got almost $33 million fund balance. Now, those people who disagree with me will say, the state's got $30 billion in reserve. Tell the state to give us some money. Well, wait a minute. What's the difference? The difference is this: the MISD can't go to Austin and demand some money. But we've got almost $33 million, and our deficit is not going to be as high as they're saying it is, because every time they talk about the deficit, it keeps going down lower and lower. And you've seen that. We started $6.5 million in the budget last year. At the end of the year, it ended at $832,000, from 6.4 to 832. Guarantee you, when we end this year, despite the 3% raise that I voted for teachers and 1% for everybody else, it won't be $5 million. It'll be something quite a bit lower. And we don't even know what the state is going to do, how much funding they're going to do. So I think it was ill-conceived. I'm not questioning any motives. And one other thing, it took one vote to lower that INS rate by 3 cents from 44 to 41, right?
Yeah, they mentioned that the INS rate can go up. But, on the other side of that argument, the board has been cutting the rate. Now, I know there's different terminologies there, but the rate, in general, the rate, they drop it down some every year. They drop it down some. So that's been the pattern, at least since I've been here. And so why would they raise the INS rate? That's a question that was asked.
The INS rate, if you're going to float a bond, you raise the rate, you get more revenues, more bond rating. And the point is, I'm not saying anybody's going to do this, but what I'm saying is this. We were told you can't do it, you can't do it, you can't do it, you shouldn't do it, you shouldn't do it, shouldn't do it. We vote one vote and it's lower. One vote and they can raise it back up. And there will be no Vader election for that vote. So in one vote, in one meeting, they can raise the INS rate right back up.
And then you got a tax increase.
You've got a real tax increase for real. So you would have, if the Vader passes, you would have raised the M&O sign by 3 cents. And if they can raise the Vader back up and they're looking at a bond, it raises bond capacity. We need more bond capacity, take a vote and raise it.
Wow. Well, on my show, I love to give my guests the last word. So I'm going to go ahead and give you the mic and shut up and let you talk to the people in Midlothian.
I love this community. I love this school district. I was a land developer and home builder for almost 40 years. I haven't done that in a few years now. I ran because I want our district to be the best. I want us to be an A district. I ran because I've already said the 4 T's over and over. Taxes, I want to be lower. Teachers, I want to be higher. I want transparency, and I want test scores to increase. That's my motivation. I am a businessman. I may not be the best cheerleader, but I'm a businessman. I want to look at everything from that perspective. How do we give you the best for the least amount of money? It doesn't mean I have any ill thoughts or ill will toward anyone. That's untrue. So the reason I've taken this stance of putting these issues that I just went over with DV on the internet is to give a discussion. Now, what I have seen is some people don't want to discuss the issues. They want to attack the person. On one side, you have an entire taxing entity. That's the Midlothian ISD. They are taking a tack of spending over $70,000 to promote this. Okay, that's fine. I'm the only person on the other side that's taking a real vocal perspective on this. And I hope that before you dismiss what I say, that you will do the math. And if you want to go to my personal Facebook page, because the MISD brought an attorney in and spent an hour's worth of her time to tell us what could have been told to us in an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper and saved all those attorney's fees. That's the kind of cutbacks I'm talking about. It's not one cutback to make all the deficit up, but it's a bunch of little cutbacks, little savings. I can't say anything on my MISD Facebook page, but if you go to my personal Facebook page, I've made my post all public regarding the MISD. I hope you take the time to look at it and look at the calculation and just consider what I say. Do we stop spending money on organizations, entities, and memberships that don't support the virtues and values that made MISD great? Or do we just keep raising taxes? And I think we got to make the cuts over here that are exclusive cuts to teachers and the classrooms.
Yeah. Thank you so much for coming on.
And thank you for everybody who's watched. I appreciate you taking the time very much. And I hope you support MISD, that you're MISD proud by voting no to the Vader.
Folks, I hope you will get out there and vote in general, because there has been a lot of people lost in this country for that right to vote. Get out there and vote and voice your opinion. I wanted to provide as much information as I could for you. Now you have both sides. You decide. You take care.